The real push right now is to control wild pigs because of the risk that they could carry African swine fever if it ever came into Canada. But the other thing, really, and it's not trivial, is that these animals do pose a risk to human safety.
Welcome to the Swine Canada podcast show, brought to you by Wisenetics. We are dedicated to bringing you the latest insights and discussions in the Canadian pork industry. So my name is Miranda Smith, and I'll be the host for today's episode. And today's guest is Dr. Wayne Lees, who is the coordinator for Squeal on Pigs Manitoba. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the wild pig control in Manitoba and maybe Canada in general. Welcome to the show, Wayne.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, so before we get started on wild pigs, can you just give us a very brief introduction on your own background and a little bit about what Squeal on Pigs Manitoba does?
Okay, so my background is I'm a veterinarian, and I've worked for in private practice and for governments of various levels for a number of years rather. I tried to retire, but then I got recruited into the swine control program in Manitoba. So really started it back in 2022 and really started in earnest with trying to get rid of invasive wild pigs in Manitoba.
Okay, perfect. And so why should we care about wild pigs?
Well, wild pigs present a problem on a number of fronts. The first front is that they're an invasive species and they don't belong here. They were introduced back in the 1980s when people thought it was a good idea to try to diversify farm income and try a new species, but they really proved not to be economically viable. And as a result of that, a number of these Eurasian wild boar escaped and established populations in the wild. And in the wild, they actually do a lot of environmental damage. They will eat small mammals and eggs of ground nesting birds. They'll destroy the ecosystem through their rooting. And they also are a potential hazard for carrying foreign animal diseases if those were ever to be introduced into the country. So the real push right now is to control wild pigs because of the risk that they could carry African swine fever if it ever came into Canada. But the other thing, really, and it's not trivial, is that these animals do pose a risk to human safety. If people come across them, and they feel threatened or cornered, they will charge. And it's pretty scary when that happens.
Yes, I can imagine. So are there more wild pigs now than, like, say, 10 or 20 years ago? Are they, like, spreading?
Well, if you look at some websites, it would give you the impression that, the range of these pigs is expanding. And I think it's fair to say that the geographical range has probably expanded, but I'm not sure that we're actually seeing that big an increase in the population, and those are two different things. So we're becoming more aware of wild pigs, so people are much more likely to report them now rather than before. And so if you look at strictly the number of sightings that are reported from the public, in Manitoba, our sightings kind of remain about the level of 100 to 150 sightings every year. And so that's because of our public outreach campaign to encourage people to report. And we're learning more about the geographic distribution in Manitoba, particularly.
Yeah, so I also have heard from a colleague of yours at the University of Calgary who's doing research there that there's, like, you're starting to figure out, like, specific areas that they like to be in. So can you talk a little bit about like where do they like to live?
I think the one thing that we have to recognize is that wild pig situation in Canada is very, very different than the wild pig situation in the US or in Australia, where they have warm climates. And we can talk about that a little bit later. But the geographic areas that they like to inhabit tend to be what I call the parkland areas, where you have brush and some forest next to agricultural land. It's kind of that mixed area. Um, they they don't probably do terribly well in strict boreal forest. You might get the odd pig or the small number of pigs there, but there's not really a lot for them to eat there. And so I don't think that we're going to see massive invasions into the what I would call the deep bush. Um, so they like that transition area where there's agricultural land nearby, especially if they grow corn. They really like corn or potatoes. And then they can go into the bush or into the trees to bed down and that sort of thing. So in Manitoba, the prime area tends to be what we call the spruce woods area. It's about 20 or 30 kilometers southeast of Brandon, Manitoba. And it seems to provide that range of habitat that they like.
And so specifically, like when we're talking about the Eurasian wild boar, like you mentioned already a little bit, like it's quite different here in like the cold climate of Canada versus say like Texas or Australia. So can you go into a little bit more detail, like what are the differences that we're seeing, and as well as like in eradication efforts?
Well, when we first started this program, we were just using information developed from the US because they had the most experience. And in many US, especially southern states, the wild pig population rather is rampant. Like they're everywhere and they do a tremendous amount of damage. What we've realized over the last number of years is that our situation is nothing like the southern US. These pigs have to deal with minus 30 to plus 30 centigrade temperatures. They have to deal with winter where you get deep snow and perhaps difficult to find food. And so what we've realized is that the population is not growing at nearly the rate that it does in the southern climates or in the warmer areas of North America, or even say in Australia, where temperature is not an issue there. We find that these pigs in our circumstances tend to travel in small groups. They don't tend to have huge numbers in any one group or sounder. So our group size is somewhere, I would say, 8 to 10 sows plus juveniles. So the sounders usually comprise the females and the juveniles that are growing up. And then the males tend to be lone males, and they'll travel around. And so they travel a little bit more from place to place, looking for breeding opportunities. So that's how our population tends to work.
And so does that then have implications for the eradication programs?
Yeah, because there's such a big die-off of young pigs, especially during a harsh winter. The population isn't really expanding like you would expect. And so we've looked at the population in terms of age class of the number of pigs that we trap every year. And you can really look at this as an ongoing census, if you will, because once you trap a population or a group of pigs, you remove them. And so you can do the count and put them into different age classes. And what we find then is that about half of the pigs that we trap are what we would call adults or mature breeding animals, mainly females. There's about a third that end up being kind of the pre-adults, the juveniles, and then about a fifth or so end up being young piglets. So if you think about that for a minute, if you had a rapidly expanding population, you'd have lots and lots of piglets and perhaps fewer and fewer adults. But our information is exactly the opposite, that we're finding many more adults than young animals, and that tends to reflect that this population isn't really expanding at the exponential rate that it does in other countries. In the U.S., the first estimate was that you had to remove 70% of the population every year just to stay in the same place. And we think that just doesn't apply to our situation at all. It's winter is really our friend when it comes to controlling wild pigs.
So is there a hope to eradicate wild boar from the Canadian landscape entirely, or does that seem to be impossible?
Well, I'm optimistic that we can do that. And the reason I say that is that there's a lot more interest now in wild pig control than there was even half a dozen years ago. People are recognizing that it's a serious issue. And I think the fact that, our numbers aren't, like, we're not dealing with millions of pigs. We're not dealing with tens of thousands of pigs. We're probably dealing in Manitoba. Our working estimate is somewhere in the high hundreds to low thousands of these Eurasian wild boar. And so I think we can get rid of them. It will take some time and effort. But I look to the rat control program in Alberta as a bit of a model. In Alberta, as you know, the number of years ago, I think it was about 50 years ago, they decided they weren't going to allow Norway rats into Alberta. And so they decided then that they were going to do a rat control program across the entire province. And it took them a few years, but they were able to do that. And Alberta still remains rat-free, if you want to call it that. And so I think if we apply the same principles and we're diligent, I think we can eradicate these animals from the province.
But then how do you make sure that they don't continue coming in from the south?
They don't tend to come up from the south because the wild pig problem doesn't really affect the northern states very much. So we have a bit of a buffer there. It's fair to say that the Americans are more worried about Canadian wild pigs traveling south than Canadians are worried about American wild pigs traveling north. But across the prairies is really where the Eurasian wild boar problem resides. In the other provinces, it's mainly escaped domestic pigs, and that will always be, a small trickle of the problem. But the Eurasian wild boar, I think we can get rid of them.
That's good news. So I'd like to switch now to talking a little about new methodologies that are being explored. So can you talk a little bit about some of those?
Sure. So just to give you a little bit of background, finding wild pigs is our biggest issue. Knowing where to look and to find them is our biggest problem in terms of knowing then where to look harder, set up traps, and start the removal process. So when we get a report from the public, we will interview all the landowners in that area, and then if those landowners have seen pigs or we can see signs that pigs have been there, we'll set up a trail camera and a baiting station and see if we can attract pigs to that area. And if that works, then we'll set up a trap, either a net trap or a corral trap, to try to capture the group. As part of that surveillance, we will also use drones, thermal imaging drones, to get to areas that we can't access easily on the ground. And this has been a real game changer for us, because with a drone, you can actually cover a lot of very difficult terrain that would be very hard on foot to scout. So the drones have been especially useful for us in the fall, when the temperatures are a little bit cooler. The images really pop then, and we can show evidence of pigs, either the direct evidence or where they've been through drones. The other thing that we have to contend with, though, is that if you rely strictly on public sightings, you have to have the pig and the person at the same place at the same time. And where there aren't many people, you're not likely to get many sightings. And so we're starting to employ other technologies like environmental DNA sampling in water through an association with Assiniboine College and BDX Laboratories in Winnipeg. We're testing out different ways that we can sample stream water and test it for pig DNA. And so this is going to be an especially useful technique, I think, in areas that where there aren't many people, so that we can hopefully identify where wild pigs are.
That is very interesting. So the idea is that pigs will either urinate or defecate in the water, or there's some hair in the water?
Basically, all they have to do is walk through the water.
Oh, okay.
And this technique was first developed by USDA in Fort Collins, Colorado. But the original methodology didn't work well under our circumstances. And so we've been trying to refine that methodology so that we can collect stream water and then determine, if pigs are in that area. And so this year we're setting up trail cameras and water collection stations and trying to determine, when do the pigs get into the water and how far downstream can we collect that water and get a positive.
Okay, so that's ongoing research. Very interesting. So you also mentioned the thermal imaging drones. So how do you pick up wild boar versus, for example, deer?
The images are really clear. You can tell, just by looking at the image, what the shape is. And we've actually had footage of wild pigs going through a cornfield, for instance, where the corn is, 2 or 3 meters high, and you can follow the wild pigs running through the different corn rows. And so it's pretty impressive, the technology that's available now.
You also told me a little bit earlier about cell camera networks. So is that something that is being used, and how?
We have about 100 cell cameras deployed at any one time across the province. And these cameras aren't just the ordinary game trail cameras. They're connected by an antenna and a solar pack, so that we can download those images to our smartphone. So that means then that we can check cameras for images and never have to visit the site, which is a huge advantage, because then you don't leave scent and you're not disturbing the site at all. So that's been a very important part of our surveillance network. So and we'll deploy a camera on a landowner's property and give the landowner access so that they can actually get their pictures on their cell phones as well. And so the collaborative effort is really the key to our success because we work very closely with landowners.
So, any other methodologies that you are using that are kind of newish?
We're always looking for new things. What I would like to do is be able to track these pigs. I think that will come down the road a little ways, but being able to, say, put a satellite receiver on, a captured pig and then see exactly where it goes, I think we're not quite ready to do that yet, but that will be, I think, something that we'll consider down the road.
Yeah, that'll give a lot more additional information on like how long they stay in certain places and such like that, things like that. So
exactly, there have been studies done in other places, using satellite imagery. I'm recalling one in Australia, but you have to adapt that to each circumstance. So what works, the conclusions that you draw in Australia, you can't directly apply to the Canadian situation.
yeah, as you already mentioned earlier, they're quite different situations. So
That's right. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So what is the long-term outlook for controlling wild pigs?
Well, I think if people were to ask me, how long will this take? I think my guess is it will take at least a decade of pretty concerted effort in Manitoba to significantly reduce the population. It's always hard to get the last few. That's always the difficult part. But I think that we can probably eliminate most of the wild pigs from Manitoba within a decade.
And any idea about the other prairie provinces? Are they in a similar situation, or is it a little harder for them?
I can't really speak for the other provinces. I think each province has to adapt their own program to their own situation. Because each province runs its own program, everybody does it slightly differently. Although we all have the same goal and of getting rid of these animals, the methodologies will vary a little bit, and the governance around how the program works will vary a little bit.
So, is there anything else you would like to share with us today around wild boar?
Yeah, I think in each province there is a wild pig control number, and I really encourage folks then to report sightings because that really does help the program to be able to locate where the wild pigs are and then start to take some action. If people don't report, then it really ends up tying our hands a little bit because we don't know where to look hard, and that's really what the biggest issue is finding them, and then you can take action once you find them.
And can people report only when they actually see a wild boar, or also if they see signs that maybe a wild boar was there?
Usually, signs of rooting are pretty impressive. When you see a pasture that looks like a rototiller went through it, that's very likely to be wild pigs. So I would report those as well. In Manitoba, our toll-free number is 1-833-SPOT-PIG. But we also have a website, which is www.squealonpigsmb.org. And through that website, people can report what they've seen, and then we'll get back to them and ask them if there's any more details they can provide. But we also list all our reports on there so that people can see what our progress has been over the last number of years. And we publish a map that shows, where the hotspots are and where people have actually reported a sighting. So we try to update that every 3 months because reporting sightings that were gathered, years ago doesn't really help. We want to know where the pigs are now so that we can actually take action.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds like a very good website for people to check out. So
it's time for our famous 3.
Swine Veterinary Partners comprises 4 well-established clinics across Canada. Precision Veterinary Services, Premier SHP, Demeter, Ontario, and Demeter, Quebec.
So thank you very much for enlightening us on the wild pig situation in Manitoba. So now we'll go to the final 3 questions. So the first one is, what is your favorite swine-related book or resource?
Generally, I sort of troll for wild pig related articles on the internet or things like that. So I don't have a book particularly, but the knowledge about wild pigs is changing so much that you need to keep up to date in terms of techniques and things. We can always learn something even from publications from other countries. And hopefully they will learn something from our publications.
And then, is there a favorite book or resource outside of agriculture?
Yes, I think I've been reading, trying to go back through reading some of the classic literature lately. So I just finished Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and it's a good read for our times. I think it's a good read.
Okay, and then the last question. In your opinion, what sets successful swine professionals apart from those that are not?
Well, what I've always admired in people who are leaders is a willingness to be curious and try new things. I think that's important. But going along with that is leading with integrity. And so I think if you can be curious and never completely bored with status quo, always have an inquiring mind and approach these new problems with integrity. I think that's the key to a good leader.
Okay, so thanks so much, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Swine Canada podcast show presented by Wisenetics. So don't forget to subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on future episodes. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review. So this is Miranda Smith from the Swine Canada podcast show signing off. Until next time.